What's up, everybody? Chester ARP Church Devotional Podcast. Hey, thanks so much for joining us. We are in the book of Ezra, Ezra chapter 1 today, and we're going to pick this up in verse 5 of Ezra chapter 1. The people of God, the Judeans who have been in captivity, are allowed to return home to Jerusalem, and as they return home, they are given what they need in order to rebuild the temple of God. And this was as a result of the decree of Cyrus, the king of Persia, who has enabled the people to return home to reestablish the worship of God, which I find to be a remarkable thing when we think about the fact that Cyrus is the king of Persia, and he's allowing these people to return home to their homeland, to the center of their socioeconomic and political world, and in their religious world, to return home and reestablish the temple, which was the center of their socioeconomic and political life. And so he's basically saying, I want you guys to return home, reclaim your faith, reclaim your social interactions and your relationships, reclaim your economy, reclaim your sense of identity, national identity, under my rule. And that's quite a remarkable thing. But that's exactly what happens here in this story. So pick it up in verse 5 of Ezra chapter 1. Then rose up the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, everyone whose spirit God had stirred up to go to rebuild the house of the Lord that is in Jerusalem. And all who were about them aided them with vessels of silver, with gold, with goods, and with beasts, and with costly wares, besides all that was freely offered. Cyrus the king also brought out the vessels of the house of the Lord that Nebuchadnezzar had carried away from Jerusalem, and placed them in the house of his gods. Cyrus king of Persia brought these out in the charge of Mithridates, the treasurer, who counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. And this was the number of them: 30 basins of gold, 1,000 basins of silver, 29 censers, 30 bowls of gold, 410 bowls of silver, and 1,000 other vessels. All the vessels of gold and silver were 5,400. All these did Sheshbazzar bring up when the exiles were brought up from Babylonia to Jerusalem. Now, I find this to be a remarkable thing, that the decree goes out from Cyrus, as I said a moment ago, that they're going to be able to return home and reestablish their lives, reestablish their worship, reestablish their social interactions, reestablish their culture, reestablish in some ways their economic system. And they're going to do this under the watchful eye of the Medo-Persian Empire. And so they're going to return home. King Cyrus has given them the decree to do that. But it's interesting, he says, as we read in the first part of chapter 1, that the God of all heaven had laid that burden on his heart. But it's interesting, he says, when you return home, if you wish to return home, you return home with silver, gold, goods with beasts, besides freewill offerings for the house of God that is in Jerusalem. And so he says, I want you to go home. And as you go home, I want you to receive, right? I want you to get from the people who live around you what you need to go reestablish yourself in this homeland. We see God doing an amazing work here. Not only are they allowed to return home, God is sending them home with the vessels, with the things that they need. And in the passage we just read, Cyrus himself gives them back all of the basins, all of the vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the house of God when he sacked it and carried off into his own captivity, or into his own land, and placed it in the houses of his own gods, so in the temples that were designated to the gods of Babylon. And in a sense gave the spoil that he had taken from the land of Jerusalem, the people of the God of the Bible, and brought that spoil and placed it in front of his gods, which were fake gods, but it was a demonstration that in his mind, his gods and his nation was stronger than the people of God. But we, of course, know the story of the Bible is that Babylon was successful in sacking Israel, or sacking Jerusalem, and carrying off the Judeans in captivity only because the God of the Bible had intended for that to be the case. That carrying off into captivity was a discipline for the people of God for their rejection and rebellion of God. And so as a result of that, Nebuchadnezzar was successful only because the God of the Bible used him to be successful and enabled him to do what God had wanted him to do. And so though Nebuchadnezzar thought it was victory, it was not a victory. It was God giving Nebuchadnezzar that victory to discipline his people to accomplish his eternal decree, which he had established in the world. Well, the same thing is happening here with Cyrus. Now, Cyrus is sending them back in accordance with the will of God. We said last time, if you were with us, that a tremendous change in foreign policy had begun to develop in the land of Babylon, even up to the point of captivity. And then once the Medo-Persians took over, Cyrus has decided he's going to send everybody back home. So everybody who wants to go back home can go back home. About 50,000 do. And that's where we are here, beginning of verse 5, that only 50,000, the heads of the fathers' houses in Jerusalem, who felt whose spirit God had stirred up to go home and to rebuild the house of the Lord that is in Jerusalem, went back. God didn't stir up everybody else. There were more than 50,000 captives in captivity, but he only stirred up 50,000 roughly, and he sent them home to Jerusalem to rebuild and to reestablish his worship, to reestablish his name in Jerusalem. God stirred up certain people to return. No doubt some of those people were masons and carpenters and people who were skilled at doing what they were doing. Some of them were farmers. Some of them were good in silver works and in gold work and in iron work, etc. So God is sending back the people who were necessary for the rebuilding of the temple, and then who were necessary to support the work of the rebuilding of the temple and to repopulate the land. And so God has stirred up those whom he would have to go back, and they would go back. Not everybody went back. Some stayed home, but God laid a burden on their hearts to return, laid a burden on the hearts of others to return to Jerusalem and to reestablish the worship of God there in Jerusalem and reestablish the city. And so God works that way. I think one of the things that the book of Ezra teaches me early on is not only does God work through mysterious ways and in the ways of the world, in the lives of other people, but God also has purposes for which he calls certain people. He calls us all in different ways to different tasks. Just because someone didn't return home didn't make them less of a Jew, didn't make them less faithful in a sense, right? God just stirred up the ones he wanted to go home. And he calls us in different ways, and we are called to respond to that call in our hearts, that burden on our hearts, and fulfill the will that God has for us. And that's what these folks did. They went home, for they had that burden to return home and do the work that God had given them. And then God sends them with everything they need to accomplish that work. He calls us, he equips us, and he gives us what we need. You guys, I'm out of time. Take care. I'll catch you next time.